Welcome to Making Waves, a show about sound art, produced for WGXC Wave Farm by New Adventures in Sound Art. I'm Darren Copeland. I'm off camera right now for those joining us online. This is a kind of radio show with some visual intervention. And we have a live audience, and we also have an online audience. And we're going to begin the show with, once we get going, we'll begin the show with the performance by Ben Donoghue of Tree Frog Radio. And this piece is a live electronic music performance that's based on documentary recordings profiling the activity of the radio initiative Tree Frog Radio. Following the performance by Ben, we will be bringing our two audiences together who've already been interacting here in the preamble and to bring them together and to talk about Tree Frog Radio, talk about Ben's performance, and so on. And we're very delighted to have Ron Sokolowski here and other members of Tree Frog Radio and that are on our online audience that have joined us from BC. All right. Well, here's our performance of Tree Frog Radio by Ben Donoghue.
It was in mid-January 2005, on a crisp winter eve, one of the coldest nights people could remember in years, when a handful of programmers gathered together to warm up our island airwaves with the launch of Tree Frog Radio. While we each took turns inside our small trailer studio to spin a few tunes and greet any friends and neighbors who might be listening, the rest of us huddled together round a campfire nearby, swaying to the music, while joking and laughing at the outrageous spectacle of ourselves. This eccentric, shivering bunch of dedicated audio rebels, celebrating the birth of our homemade pirate radio swaying to the music, while joking and laughing at the outrageous spectacle. While we each took turns inside our small trailer studio to spin a few tunes and greet any friends and neighbors who might be listening at the outrageous spectacle. While we each took outrageous spectacle. While we each took turns in outrageous spectacle. While we each took turns inside our small trailer spectacle. While we each took turns inside our small trailer studio to spin a few tunes and greet any friends and neighbors who might be listening, the rest of us huddled together round a campfire nearby,
swaying to the music, while joking and laughing at the outrageous spectacle. While we each took turns inside our small trailer studio to spin a few tunes and greet any friends and neighbors,
huddled together round a campfire nearby.
The rest of us huddled together round the campfire while joking and swaying to the outrageous spectacle.
Huddled together round a campfire nearby.
Swaying to the music while we each took turns and outrageous spectacle.
Huddled together round a campfire nearby.
Swaying to the music while joking and greet any friend.
Huddled together round a campfire nearby.
The rest of us huddled together round the campfire nearby, swaying to the music, while joking and while
listen to. I'm always hesitant to say jazz. It's preconceived ideas, but what that is. And some people would question what I play as even music. So I just play sound. That's the thing. But if you're doing pirate radio, any walls are only in your head.
Yeah, I just strictly do music. I don't have a whole lot of talking, although it's kind of fun to come along and talk about what I'm playing and whatever. Very free, this pirate radio thing. Coming from corporate radio to this, that's what a stark difference. Also a big difference in potential listenership. Part of the appeal of radio is being heard, of course. Here at Tree Frog, I'm never really sure how many or if any listeners are out there. That, for me, that's part of the magic.
So things go on at pirates radio stations beyond just the actual radio broadcast. Sometimes it'll be a place that people gather. Events will happen. There'll be a campfire. There'll be some kind of thing that draws people together because it's a place on the island that feels unoccupied by the government and by the corporate that control.
Mixing board, something to play music on, something player, tape, record player. And with a compressor helps us to signal, but it'll work without it. Something to monitors and some speakers so you can hear what's going out in the airwaves. There's been some people hear this. They'll say, oh, it sounds better after this. Yeah, you do that, but that's not what's going out on the radio. We're just encircling signs. Yeah, and then up the hill there's a little transmitter on it, which commonly found in the stereo show. And then there's an arrow that will train. It's simple, pretty simple too. Beyond just the
Beyond just the actual radio broadcast. Sometimes it'll give place to something beyond just the actual radio broadcast. Beyond just 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 beyond just
Sometimes it'll be a place where people gather. Events will happen. It'll be a campfire. Sometimes it'll be a place where
looking at the window of Tree Flight Studios, we have a music location. Right outside the window now is a sheep family. A view and a couple of lambs just checking out the tree front. I opened the door, I should come in, but straight down to the ground is sometimes, but I'm not all that interested in hearing about boy, it's ground like going on. This tragedy belongs to usual nature, etc., etc. I'm interested in the sound of this, the edges that the hairspin back here the tears come to the corner of your eye because not about what they're saying, but the sound of the words. As Roland Barthes puts it, although he's not referring to what I'm talking about necessarily, the grain in the voice, the voice Roland Barthes, French. Very critical philosopher in France. Simple sway to the music while joking with her. Simple sway to the music while joking. And then there's a narrative, and then there's a narrative, and then a train.
Pretty simple. You just press it, helps us to sync up and work without simple swing to the music. While Joe can press it, helps us to sync up and work without
But if you do pirate radio, any walls.
While Joe can press it, helps us to sync up and work without simple swing to the music. While Joe can press it, helps us to penetrate.
You get a sense of connection with pirate radio that you don't have with a more professionalized model. So the idea of getting away from professionalism, demystifying professionalism, trying to get to what radio can be all about, without all of the professional rigmarole that often goes with it and all the hype that we hear with radio.
So the idea of without any away from professional, you're just here with the radio professional. So the idea of without any away from professional, you're just here with the radio professional. So the idea of without any away from professional, you're just here with the radio.
Here with a more professionalized piano. So the idea of getting away from professional, you missed it. Here with trying to get professionalized piano. So the idea of without any away from professional, here with trying to get professionalized piano. So the idea of without any away from professional, here with trying to get professionalized piano. So the idea of without any away from
Here with I used to fight against that. I used to think, no, don't call me that. And then after a while, I realized, well, that's true. I'm more anti-realistic than I am unrealistic. I don't like to be confined by your idea of realism, or the ongoing sort of mainstream idea of realism is, because we're capable of so much more.
record player. Compressor helps us to signal, but it'll work without it. Something to a monitor, so it's the speaker, so you can hear what's going on in the airwaves. There's been some people hear it. They'll say, oh, it sounds better if we just have a break on the floor. And you do that. But that's not what's going out on the radio. You're just playing a circle inside the train. Yeah, and up the hill there's a transmitter, which was commonly found in this very shop. And then there's an area of imagery. It's simple, very simple.
I think it's always good to have a lot of possibilities out there that people know they can exercise if they want to. They exist for them, they may not listen, they may not decide to do a program, but just to know that that could happen, and that it's not impossible, and it's not out of bounds, that sort of expands the idea of what's considered real. This is another part of the surrealist kind of approach to things, in that, surrealism is not about escaping reality, it's about expanding reality beyond the very impoverished version of reality that is being offered to us. So basically, if people think they want to do radio and someone says, oh, that's impossible, you have to get this degree and, go to this agency of the government and get approval. Somebody else would say, well, actually, it doesn't seem that way. Right here, people can do that themselves. So that expands your idea of what is possible to include radio. And then it might even lead you to think, well, what else is possible that I tend to think of as impossible? I think the biggest thing that shuts people down in terms of realizing their dreams is the idea that somebody will come along and say, well, that's not realistic. And so the idea of expanding reality and expanding the idea of what's possible, demanding the impossible, sort of anarchist idea, they all come together in the sense of not, or refusing to accept that very limited notion of who we can be as people and as a community. In expanding the idea of what's possible, demanding the impossible, this sort of anarchist idea, they all come together in the sense of not, or in expanding the idea of what's possible, demanding the impossible, this sort of anarchist idea, they all come together in the sense of not, or in expanding the idea of what's possible, demanding the impossible.
particular Friday over this past winter, there was a big heavy snow dump. Everyone was staying inside. The roads were treacherous, and still I wanted to get my show in. If there wasn't snow messing up the setup, it worked beautifully. And I had this huge expanse here, snow piling up all around. I couldn't get the door open for a bit. Still, I was driven to keep on putting signals out there, because what a neat thing to reach across those types of conditions that keep people shut in to connect. That was a magical night for me, that particular Friday, the snow dump. It's pretty cozy in storms of all kinds. But yeah, that one heavy snowfall this past year really drove it home. It was a pinch me moment. Anybody out there? I don't know.
That was Ben Donoghue, performance of Tree Frog Radio, here from the NAISA North Media Arts Centre in South River. We've explained a little bit about what Ben was doing. He has a sea and a forest and a complex universe of cables in front of him in which he was remixing the recordings of the interviews with members of Tree Frog Radio, but also all those drones and textures you heard were processed, right, Ben, from those recordings, live here on the spot. So he didn't have any sounds, that he was playing that way. He was generating all these other sounds live.
Well, those were any of those sounds. Currently, there's nothing. The sampler, there's a whole series of samplers and loopers. Well, one sampler, I guess a lot of samplers, a lot of loopers. But there's one sound source, which is playing recordings. And as those move through the system, there's an array of crossfaders, array of different paths they can take, many of which form different types of feedback paths. And so in some cases, they may be one route, a voice, someone's voice speaking may run through a set of electronics taken from broken analog TV transmission equipment that may modulate and then demodulate, but do so very badly. Another set may then be running through a resonator, and those might meet, those will meet in a filter bank. And so those crashing pieces of feedback are all generated from the field recordings, which additionally, in a modular synthesis context, there's the audio, but also there's voltages that control things. So you say on a mixer, when you open what's called a VCA, a voltage controlled amplifier, it's like turning up a dial to allow volume through from 0 to through. And that's also a signal that exists in voltage the same as the audio signals. So any of the events being triggered, any modulation, are also being drawn from those audio. So the first process that you don't hear in a direct way is what's called a slope detector. And those audio signals are running into something. If you picture a waveform of a sound file that you might see on your computer, that slope of each spike up and down of the sound is being measured. And when it passes certain thresholds that I'm adjusting, it then says, oh, this threshold has passed in slope change. So another voltage is fired that goes to various dividers, various other devices that are then triggering other events, which may modulate the depth of a filter or adjust something else. So each piece within the feedback loops is all generated from the field recordings. So not only the audio, but also the control. So without a recording playing, everything is silent. There's no events. But it's only once that initial recording of a recording made outside, a stereo recording made outside of Tree Frog, where you hear the crows, sheep, various things happening, the sound of a Bolex camera, that you start having events triggered. And then as Sheila begins speaking, the volume increases, which increases the rate of events, which starts spiraling those feedback loops, where the main danger is, of course, with any feedback loop, that it'll spiral out of control and do something terrible to our ears. So there's limiters, various limiters, similar to what you would use in an FM radio transmission to keep it within bounds, limiter compressors to keep that feedback within bounds where it won't hurt us and is hopefully pleasurable to listen to.
Indeed. Ron, I was wondering, can I bring you into the conversation to give us a bit of background on Tree Frog Radio? We've been mentioning that name a lot, and or any of the others that have joined us who can give us some context to and about what that is.
Tree Frog Radio has been around now for 20 years, and it's basically a way of making radio on a do-it-yourself basis without official licensing or approval. It's island radio in the sense that we live on an island, which I'll not name here, but somewhere in the Salish Sea. And that island, will receive the broadcast. Sometimes it'll bounce across the water, but it's not intended for anybody other than the people of that island. That's our audience, and as well as where our participants come from. So the boundaries between audience and participants tend to blur, which is the idea. And island radio essentially is about not something that you're broadcasting to, Toronto, let's say, since you're coming from Toronto, but you're broadcasting to your neighbors. And so that changes the way people do radio because we're not even doing live streaming. We're essentially island based, and that's the, the people we're communicating with. And it's open to everybody on the island to participate. But Sheila here was one of the initiators of Tree Frog Radio too. She might want to say something.
I want to say, yeah, I think it was just that how we did it all ourselves. Like we had a meeting once and played some video of pirate radio activists in the States, and everybody after the movie felt, well, we can do this. And we got into different groups, and there were people who were carpenters or people who could, renovate a little van, or what do you call it? Trailer that we put it in. And others who, like us, who are organizers and could write about it. And then there was the funding. And it all just kind of came together fairly quickly. But we had land issues, like with the transmitters up high on a ridge, and the station was at the end of a field of sheep, and you mentioned stuff, right at the base of this hill. And so the cables all had to go up through the trees and up the hill. And so that was a bit of a challenge. And then the wiring for the audio and for our electricity was in the barn. And so they had to dig a trench because the sheep would, run all over it. So those were our obstacles. But, making the thing happen and getting the radio up and running was fairly quick. It was those land and animal issues we had to deal with.
I was wondering if anyone has any questions they'd like to ask either Ben or Ron about Tree Frog Radio and the performance this evening.
Well, just before we do that, I'd also like to say that really importantly, this project was possible due to a Canada Council research grant that let me work on a series of other projects. And so this was an outcome of that. And then this piece, because as part of that, I was shooting some film and tried some things, and the film didn't work out. So it shifted into, instead of just working with the modular and with effects units to build a soundtrack for one of my films, it then became its own standalone work. And I was fortunate to get an Ontario Arts Council Chalmers professional development grant to work with Heidi Chan Bachelard, who's one of my neighbors and also a modular synthesist in Toronto, and to fine-tune some of the more technical parts where it gets really nerdy and challenging. And it's really good to have someone else you can bounce those compositional, structural things off of who's working in a similar vein. So, yeah. And of course, all the Tree Frog folks who are always wonderful to work with and get to visit on an unnamed island.
Yeah, I'm always really, really wondering about how radio stations are put together, and I know you don't want to identify very much about you, but can you tell me what's your population you broadcast to, and how many people are actually volunteers at the station?
Well, the population has grown over that 20 years. It was originally about 1,000, and now it's more like 1,400.
Which doubles in the summer when there's tourists and people come part-time.
Yeah. And in terms of the programmers, that also has varied over the years. We've had as many as 20 programmers a week, and as little as 4 or 5 more recently. Recently, what's happened, I think, and it's a good kind of way of answering your question, is that as people have been less likely to listen to radio, terrestrial radio, and more likely to listen to podcasts, and podcasts can happen at their convenience and are easier to kind of spontaneously listen to. There's been less interest on this island in listening to radio broadcasts. So we had a heyday of shows on every day of the week and in evening and all that, and that's now become mostly a weekend thing. I think people don't even have radios in some cases, and so radio has kind of fallen out of the position it once had in people's lives. There's now a resurgence of interest in radio, and this performance that we just heard is part of that. And so more people here and in other places are realizing, the possibilities of radio and seeing that as something they want to become a part of. In terms of becoming part of Tree Frog, that we estimated once that there were at least 100 people out of that 1,400 people population that at one time or another have been involved as programmers on Tree Frog Radio.
There's been people who come in the summer too, or passing through or hanging out with friends, and they would do a show for a couple of months. But we've never been 24/7. It was usually like evenings, and then weekends were filled up more. Yeah. But yeah, it was cool. It is cool.
And a lot of it comes out of Sheila mentioned this history of pirate radio in the States. We were both involved in the pirate radio movement in the States in the 90s and the late 80s and the 90s, both in Illinois and in the Bay Area, San Francisco, in terms of the people who got involved in putting out a book called Seizing the Airwaves. That's a book that I co-edited with Ben Donoghue. A lot of stories about pirate radio there, and challenging the whole idea of access to the airwaves. And so we brought that with us when we crossed the borderline as a possibility for people here, and people here were very receptive. So we know of stations now that exist in neighborhoods and urban areas, but as you've heard from Ben and Sheila, this is rural radio we're talking about on the island that we live on. So this is not a tower block somewhere in an urban area. Pirate radio can take many different forms and geographically acclimate to lots of different environments.
In the summer, when the trailer's really hot, in the daytime anyway, we used to do a show late afternoon. And, sometimes the sheep would like come right in the door kind of and throw you off. Oh, like, what the hell? Anyways, yeah, so that's kind of our reality here.
And there are tree frogs.
Oh, yeah, and the pond.
And the transmitter is in a tree. Tree Frog Radio. And there's a Canadian book, she reminds me, called Islands of Resistance, which is about the history of pirate radio in Canada, into the contemporary versions of that.
Which does reveal the island with the permission of everybody. It didn't seem to cause some problems for us.
Yeah, and that book is co-edited by 3 people, myself and Andrea and Marion, the other 2 editors, met at an anarchist gathering, and it all grew out of that. So it has this whole idea of pirate radio has an anarchic quality that we like about it.
Yeah, and that initial voice recording that opens the piece was of Sheila reading from that book, Islands of Resistance.
I was wondering if, Ben, you could speak about the, and also Ron and Sheila and others, about the connection between pirate radio and anarchism.
There's so many, and it's primarily, for me, it's one of the many ways, and there's artist-run centers, so much of what we're involved with are ways that we do our projects, do our work, do the things that excite us without bosses. And hopefully without hierarchy, without someone having to tell people what to do, and being able to collaborate together in generative, honest, and respectful ways. And it's such a wonderful condition, whether it's we're choosing to do radio or we're making films together or building gardens, building housing, whatever it is, remembering that we have the capacity to do these things together, and be able to respect each other without a boss or money or other things telling us how to do it and what to do. And being able to say, well, we have a few $100 and we want a radio station and we don't want to spend the next 5 years of our lives filling out forms. We can just go do this thing together, is really powerful. And it's the roots of so many of within the arts sector, and the artist-run movement, organizations like NAISA and so many of our peers are also rooted in that same spirit, even if we've lost our way over the years. And it's, for me, a lot of what's really important in whether it's pirate radio, whether it's within the arts, is reclaiming that and that ability to be able to work together, and build stuff without those authoritarian structures, and being able to, when people do decide they want to be bosses and cops, telling them to fuck off.
Does others have want to jump in with comments or questions? We have a very distinguished audience in both the virtual and the online world, but they're a very quiet audience. Well, I think maybe we'll close off there then, I guess. This. Oh, you have a question? Okay, well, here we go. All I had to do was threaten to finish. Okay, so yeah, if you go in the other room, yeah. Julieta has a question.
Yeah, question for Ben.
Uh-oh.
I know I know that you walk a fine line between control and chaos with this piece. So I was just curious, how did it go in terms of, was there anything that surprised you in this performance? Yeah.
There were surprises. There always are. One of the issues of working with nonlinear feedback systems is they're inherently chaotic. And there are parts of the patch that this cable structure that sometimes will spiral out of control in ways that can't be stopped without power cycling the whole thing, which I think Julieta, we live together, and so often Julieta will hear me yelling from the other side of the house. But that didn't happen today. Everything stayed in a reasonably controlled fashion, but a lot of the structures can be thought of as primitive neurons. So there's multiple sets of inputs that are then weighted in various ways and then run through some type of nonlinearity. And that output has degrees of instability and chaos and can be thought of as a very basic way of learning. The machine itself can learn sometimes, and other times it's a very poor learner. And so then that's where it spirals. But yeah, it's always unpredictable how it'll go. Every time I run through this piece, it's the first time I've performed it publicly, and I think it went well. It's just always, there's always so many variables in it that are uncontrollable.
I find a certain resonance with some of the early live electronic music in the 1970s. David Berriman, Gordon Mama, and others. Were they or anybody else inspiration for going into this direction with modular synthesis and processing speech?
To a certain extent, my roots in music are, since I was quite young, was really involved in punk and hardcore, parts of doom metal. I've played in a lot of very obscure, terrible punk bands and some fairly good but extremely obscure doom metal bands. And I was always interested in noise and experimental music. While I was in Vancouver, a lot of people in the harsh noise scene were really influential, especially Lashen Orendorff, who works as Flat Gray, Sam McKinley, the Rita, Arlie Doyle, who goes by Burrow Owl. There was a number of really great harsh noise performers out of Vancouver who some of them became really close friends. And from them, I learned a lot more about attention to texture and control, of focusing in on small detail and texture in sound, which really resonated with my cinema practice, which some of you may be familiar with, some of you won't be, but it's a lot of structural, very minimal films, slow observation, looking and listening, and thinking about detail, being in place or being in a thing and letting it unfold. So this is really similar, and as over the last number of years, my system deciding that I knew where I wanted to go, and the technology as far as sampling and playback microprocessors had gotten smaller and fast enough that a lot of those things that I previously would have had to do in a computer, which I do find playing on a computer with a mouse very alienating. It just doesn't work for me. I lose patience and I just can't do it. For other people, it's a tool that works really well. It's not one that works for me. And so as the modular, its capacities expanded, my work with it grew. And then really, especially over the last 5 years, 6 years, where a lot more has been possible, it's being able to expand far beyond what I could do with tape loops and distortion pedals and various things. And of course, some of those early electroacoustic composers have been really key in some of my thinking, like spending a lot of time sitting with Terry Riley's work and thinking through minimalism and layering, and of course, Gordon Muma. And yeah, there's such a rich history of minimalist and experimental composition to draw from, whether it's within the more recognized Artland composers like those folks, or people working more in the extreme music underground in kind of more dark ambient and harsh noise circles. So kind of drawing from all of those elements that have made up my life. And
it's interesting how the many layers of history and activity all kind of converged in your piece and across the country, and bringing both localized activity with national or global phenomena. And thank everybody for joining us today in our excursion, and for your patience and openness, and very grateful for Ron and Sheila's contributions and being so generous and giving us the context and background behind the piece. And this has been a performance as part of the Deep Wireless Festival, which has been running since 2002. And we continue on with more activity till the end of March, including an exhibit here in South River, where we're based. And well, without further ado, thanks, and we'll see you